Alright, so let's talk about chapter 8, which is marine fishes. So this particular image right here just shows you the different body parts on a fish. And this is specifically for saltwater fish. I guess any marine fish or freshwater fish, but some organs may be a little bit different in freshwater fish from saltwater fish. And this is just a very typical fish. So like it's going to vary whether you're talking about a shark or say a parrotfish or something else of that nature. But the main things that you should know in particular is the image on the right, on the top there, shows the body parts on the outside of the fish. So you'll see that all fishes should have mouths. I hope that fish has a mouth. They will have nostrils, they will have eyes, they will have a gill cover, which is known as an operculum. They will have a gill slit, a pectoral fin, pelvic fin, anal fin, caudal fin, which is your tail fin. Not all of them will have a posterior dorsal fin. Guaranteed they will have an anterior dorsal fin. They will have at least one dorsal fin. And if it's just one dorsal fin, then it's just a dorsal fin. If they have two, like this example does, then you have an anterior and posterior. And all fishes should have a lateral line, which we're going to cover a little bit later. So I do highly recommend you get familiar with those body parts. The image below that one is just your internal organs, and you don't really need to know too much about these except for the fact that you should know that they have brains, they have stomachs, they have gills, they have an olfactory bulb, so they can, to some limited degree, smell. They have heart, liver, intestines, ovaries, and an anus, and a kidney. Forgot the kidney. And the most important thing is a swim bladder. So all fishes will have a swim bladder, and I think we will talk about those in a little bit. So there are different types of fish, and the first type of fish that we're going to talk about are jawless fishes. These don't have jaws like your parrotfish or your sharks, and they also don't have fins. What they do have is a sucker, much like a leech, and so they will suck onto whatever prey that they're hunting. And you see those teeth there on the bottom left hand image. Those teeth, they dig in to the prey, the side of their prey, and they kind of wiggle their body until they get a chunk of meat out of it. So these guys are fun, but generally speaking, your hagfishes are found in the deep ocean, and your lampreys you can find in pretty unsavory places. Like, for instance, that left-hand image there looks very dirty and very murky. The next type of fish that you have are cartilaginous. Wow, that was really unnecessary. Anyways, their next type of fish are cartilaginous fishes. So these types of fishes have their skeleton made completely out of cartilage. And so they don't have any calcium carbonate bones like we do. They have a movable jaw, and they have well-developed teeth. So for instance, your shark has some pretty razor sharp teeth, and should not be messed with. Next, cartilaginous fishes have their mouth on their ventral side. So when you look at those stingrays and manta rays, it's on the bottom of their body versus their eyes are on the top, right? And all of these types of fishes have what's known as placoid scales. So if you can think, if you guys have ever seen fish scales, majority of the time they're very flat, thin, and transparent. But when you look at shark shark scales under the microscope, they have this little hook in the middle of the scale. And when you rub your hand over shark scales, if any of you guys have ever gone to an aquarium and touched sharks and rays, their skin feels a lot like sandpaper, and it's because of that little hook that's on their scale, so that when you rub your hand over the scale, uh, it your skin is actually getting caught on those little hooks. So that's the reason why it feels like sandpaper. So here's just the general structure of a shark. As you can see, they have a snout area where they will have a number of electrical receptors. And even though they have a nostril, those electrical receptors are much more sensitive than their sense of smell. And those electrical receptors can pick up minute quantities of blood within the water column. Their eye, by far, is not as sophisticated as their sense of smell or their sense of taste. They have a spherical, which allows water to get into their system. Let's see, they have gill openings. Do keep in mind that their gill openings do not have cover over them like normal fish do. They tend to have two dorsal fins, so you'll have your first dorsal and your second dorsal fin. You'll have your caudal fin, which is differently shaped from regular bony fishes. You'll see that the top fin part to the caudal fin is much longer than the bottom, and that's to allow for upward lift over by the head area. You'll see they have an anal fin, a pelvic fin, pectoral fins, and males will have claspers near the pelvic fin, and that's to help guide them into the female shark. So female sharks will not have these claspers. Here's the general structure of a ray. So generally speaking, they'll have a snout. Their structure will be very similar to that of a shark because they're very closely related, but everything will just be flattened, if you know what I mean. So they have their eye, they're spherical. They have a midline tubercles. Not sure what that is, but they have pectoral fins and pelvic fins, and they don't exactly have a caudal fin. Their caudal fin turned into a long tail that, whether it's a stingray or a manta ray, will either have a stinger on it, that tail sting, or it won't. And then males also have claspers in this particular one. So the next type of fish is your bony fishes. So this is what majority of the fishes are. They contain swim bladders. So unlike sharks rely on blubber. No, not blubber. They rely on their caudal fin to allow to give upward lift near their head. And they also use a fatty liver. Okay. Versus bony fishes will use a swim bladder. So this is a separate organ within their body that can be filled up with air when they need to come up to the surface, and the air can be taken out when they need to go down to depth. Their gills are also covered by a fleshy material known as operculum, and this is different from your sharks, where the gills are exposed and don't have a covering. And they have what's known as cycloid scales, or ctenoids. But their type of scales don't have that hook like sharks do, so they're just flat and transparent. Fishes come in different body shapes. So as you can see in this image here, you can have what's known as torpedo form, but basically torpedo shape, so they're very aerodynamic, and these typically tend to be your migratory species like your tuna, who are keystone predators within ecosystems, and they are very fast swimmers. And then you can have ventrally flattened, so like your flounder, so it's flat, um, and his eyes are on top of his body, right? You can also have ribbon-like, you can have eel-like, you can have a sphere-looking fish, so that would be your sunfish, which is just big and round. You can have laterally flattened, which is flattened to the side instead of up and down, and so those would be your trevallies. These are also very large predator fishes that live out in the open ocean. Or you could have arrow-like, which are your barracudas. And all fishes need some way of camouflaging themselves from their predators. So their skin under their scales have what's known as chromatophores. So these are special cells on their skin that contain color pigments. So if you see this fish down at the bottom there, his skin goes from blue near his mouth to red by his tail. And so each skin special cell within a given area gives off a different color. And some fishes have these specialized chromatophores known as iridophores. And if you see in the image on the right hand side there, a lot of these silver fishes that you see out in the open ocean, or a majority of the ones that aren't pretty colored, will have these iridophores on their skin, and it basically just makes their silvery skin look iridescent. So you can see different types of iridophores on different fishes on that image right there. And so there are different types of coloration that help protect fishes and have been developed as a protection strategy. So you can see cryptic coloration, disruptive coloration, and counter shading. So cryptic coloration is what you'll see that flounder doing in the top image there. He's blending in with his environment, and he's using his skin color to help him blend in. So there's a number of fishes that would do that. Flounder is probably one of the more well-known ones for doing it. And then you can have disruptive coloration. So that Moorish idol on the right hand side there, on the right image there, he has stripes. But other fishes will have bars or spots or different shapes and colors. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to confuse his predator from knowing where his head is at. So the predator might come by, and as this guy's swimming along, all the predator sees is stripes. So he doesn't know if the tail's the head, or if the head is the head, or if that long fin, the dorsal fin piece, if that's where the head's at. It tends to confuse the predator. Especially if you see a butterfly fish, they tend to have a lot of dots and a lot of bars, and so that is really disruptive and confusing for predators. And then you also have counter shading, which is your shark down there. Sharks and large predator fishes in the open ocean are famous for doing counter shading, and that's where you have a white bottom and a dark top. And that's because the white bottom, if your prey, for that shark, let's just say the prey was under him and the prey looked up, theoretically speaking, the prey wouldn't be able to see the shark because his white bottom blends in with the light, the really light surface of the ocean. above him. And then likewise, if the prey was above the shark and looked down, the prey wouldn't be able to see the shark, because as he's looking down, all he sees is darkness, and that dark top will help let the shark blend in with the dark, deep ocean. So how do fish get around? Generally speaking, they do what's known as S-shaped contractions, and that's basically where they move their head. It moves through their head to their tail, and it pushes the water side to side. So as you can see in that example there, the fish on the left, he's moving his whole body in an S shape, which causes water to be pushed off to the side, but then the resultant movement is forward. And so he'll keep doing that back and forth. And depending on what type of fish you are, will depend on how much of your body moves in this S shape. So as you can see on the right hand side there, lowercase a, that fish, is more eel-like and will tend to contract its body, more of its body, than that fish in C. Since that fish in C is much larger in its body, pretty much only its tail is moving as it moves. The purpose of fins. Okay. Each fin has its own purpose. And so, for instance, if we just started the caudal fin, the tail fin, the purpose of the caudal fin is for forward movement, to allow the organism to go forward, right? So in this case, the shark's tail will move side to side, which will create a downward pressure at the tail, which will then cause an upward pressure near the head, and that will help the shark from sinking. This is very different from mammals, in which their tails go up and down. Then you have your pectoral fins. So your pectoral fins are meant to be, I guess if you relate it to a car, it would be the steering wheel. If the shark wants to go left, it will turn to the left, and the shark will then turn left, right? Or tilt left, I should say, and then the shark will go left. And likewise, the shark will tilt right, and then the shark will go right. So that's what the pectoral fins are. The dorsal fin is kind of like a rudder in the sense where it keeps the organism going straight. And then the pelvic and anal fins, they mainly just serve a similar purpose of making sure that the shark stays straight and doesn't like flip over or do funny stuff like that. All right, so let's see. The shape of the mouth for a fish varies depending on what type of food resources that fish relies on. So that barracuda right there has teeth. You can also see that its jaw opens up quite a bit, so you know that fish right there eats other fish, because it needs to have a way in which it can break down the bones. If you look at B, the long-billed six-spine butterfly fish, that fish has a very long snout, and you don't see any teeth, and that's because this particular fish relies on its snout to get into hard-to-reach areas like small little crevices to get small little shrimp or algae or whatnot. Next, we have our slip mouth type of fish, and you can see here that the mouth actually slips out a little bit, can extend out, and that can accommodate for eating small fish. and maybe some crustaceans and whatnot. And then you have your parrotfish. Your parrotfish has a very hard beak-like mouth, and this is so that it can chomp away at the coral so that it can eat the polyps found within coral. That's the main distinction now. They're not eating the rock itself, they're eating the polyps, the organisms on the coral. And then what they poop out is fine grains of that coral, which then turn into sand. And then lastly, you have your herring. Your herring has an upturned mouth. You can see it looks like it's frowning all the time, but that allows it to get any plankton or small fish that are up at the surface. So the herring will come up from underneath the surface, and that upturned mouth can let it take in whatever organism is at the surface much more easily than the other mouth types. So the fish anatomy, this is a pretty typical fish anatomy. We went over it very briefly in the second slide, but here you can see they do have a spinal cord. So all fish are chordates, right? So they have a spinal cord that is solid, all right, firm, not flexible. They do have the swim bladder or air bladder. They have all of these other things. Let's see, what is important for you guys to know here. Just know the different. Just be familiar with where the different organs are. I'm not going to test you on, say, the specific organs, but if I test you on anything, it might be on the not organs, but the body parts that are on the outside of the fish. For example, the dorsal fin, the pectoral fin, the caudal fin, the lateral line, the operculum, those sorts of things I would like you guys to know. Whether you know where the gonad is or the stomach is, maybe not so much. I probably won't test you on those things. All right. So next, the circulatory system. The fish's circulatory system starts off with the gills. Okay, so everything starts at the gills. This is where your oxygen is brought into the body at the gills. And as you can see here, you have the red areas, which are oxygen rich. So the oxygen passes over the gills. It gets incorporated into the arteries and the blood, and then it circulates around the body in the capillaries, and then it comes back to the gills. You can see the blue veins there that are oxygen poor, comes back to the gills where it gets replenished with oxygen, and it circulates that way. Okay. So if we take a closer look at the gills, the water will enter through the mouth when the mouth is open. And that brings in, it fills up his mouth and gills with water. And then as the fish closes his mouth, right? So when the mouth is open, the gills are closed. Okay. And when he closes his mouth, his gills open up, pushes that water over the gills, and causes the oxygen to get to be pushed into the gills and into the blood system. Okay, so we touched briefly in the chemistry section about osmoregulation in fishes. And so saltwater fish need to drink a lot of water in order to get enough water to dilute their salt concentration, because they are losing water to the surrounding ocean. So that means they pee out a lot of excess salt, and a lot of salt. Oh no, it's okay. And a lot of salt is excreted through the gills as well too. Yeah. Why don't you tell them about osmoregulation? Yeah. And then freshwater fish are just the opposite. They oh no, I'm sorry. Saltwater fish do not excrete a lot of urine because they need to try to keep in as much water as possible, because they are losing a lot of water through osmosis through their skin. Freshwater fish do need to pee a lot because they are bringing in a lot of water due to osmosis, because their salt concentration is greater on the inside than it is on the outside. Sharks, on the other hand, the salt will diffuse through their gills. They will take in some water when they eat their food, but they don't actively drink like the other fish do. They gain water primarily through osmosis, so they have to pee a lot to get rid of the excess water that they're bringing in. Okay, so now the lateral line that I was talking about previously, that is a line that runs all through their head part, and then one single line that runs from the head to the tail. And you'll be able to see this on a lot of fish when you look at their side. But essentially, what it does is it allows the fish to know when something is near him, off to the side, because that fish can't look behind him or off to the side unless they turn around, right? So this is a really quick way for them to know what's going on around them, whether a predator has passed by, or whether they need to adjust their trajectory. And so the lateral line occurs right underneath their skin. And you can see on the image B, it is a canal that can bring water in. And that water, that nerve, the lateral line nerve there, is connected to the canal. And it's okay. And it can sense differences in water pressure that are coming in. Apparently he has a lot to say to you guys today. And so on the image C there, you can see what the sensory hair looks like within the lateral line canal. All right, so that lateral line, that little sensory hair is called a cupula, right? And it's attached to the nerve, and so it senses differences in water pressure. So fish behavior. Fish can be territorial, so that humu nuku nuku apua'a is very territorial, especially when they are mating. And they can create temporary and permanent territories that they will defend. Yeah, so what he's trying to tell you is I got bit by one of these guys on Maui one time when I was snorkeling, and I had no idea I had swam over its nest, but because it was protecting its nest, it came up and bit me on the arm. That was fun. They can also do schooling, which is the image that you see on the bottom middle there. These are typically seen in cuploid fishes, which are small little herring or anchovy-like fishes. And then you can have migratory species, which will travel from one place to another. And so the example are salmon up in Alaska. They do migrations every year to breeding grounds on land. On land, but they travel up freshwater streams to get to the breeding ground, and that's an image of them breeding. And then you do have some species of fishes that are hermaphrodites. So clownfishes are a good example of hermaphrodites, where they have both female and male organs. So clownfishes exhibit a lot of weird behaviors, and one of them is what's known as sex reversal. This is also seen in parrotfish as well too. So in this particular case, the clownfish dominant female is in charge of the group, and there's a dominant male, but the dominant female is the one that's in charge of everything, and then the male is just kind of like her property per se. And then you have all other fishes that do not have a gender in this case. And so when the dominant female either dies or is preyed upon, or somehow goes missing from the group, then the dominant male turns into the new dominant female. And then the largest of the non-sex, the other ones that don't have a gender, the largest one will then turn into the new male. All right. This is similar to parrotfish in the sense that parrotfish will have a dominant male, so it's just the opposite, and they will have a predominant female. And when that dominant male dies or gets fished or whatever, that dominant female will then turn into the male, and the larger female in the group will then turn into the new dominant female. Yep. Okay, so reproductive behavior of fishes. Some of them do courtship, like the betta does down there. Typically with courtship, you'll see the male being very pretty, much like a peacock, and then the female will look very drab and very plain. Oh, I'm so sorry. He's very talkative today. You can do broadcast spawning, which you see on the right-hand image there. Basically, the fishes will just get together, release all of their sperm and gametes into the water column, and hope they survive. And then you can also have internal fertilization, which is occurring in that seahorse right there. So in this case, the male seahorse is the one that actually broods the eggs. The female will actually lay the eggs inside of his pouch, and he will then take care of them until they're ready to hatch, and then they will hatch out of his pouch, and the parents will take care of them. And then lastly, modes of sexual reproduction. So there are 3 different ways in which fish can reproduce. You have oviparity, you have ovoviviparity, and viviparity. So oviparity, tongue twister here, will lay the undeveloped eggs, and fertilization occurs externally outside of the body. And sometimes in fish, or not fish, in sharks and rays, you can get internal fertilization, but the eggs are then deposited outside and are hatched outside of the body. Whereas when you have ovoviviparity, that's internal development without direct maternal nourishment. Shh, mommy's almost done. And this is where the eggs will be fertilized inside. They will develop inside, but then as soon as they're born, they're left to fend for themselves. And then lastly is viviparity, which is internal development with direct nourishment from mother. So this is basically what humans do. This is what marine mammals do, and some fish will do this, and some sharks will do this. So essentially, development happens internally, and the fetus will get nourishment from the mother. And this is different from ovoviviparity, which they don't get any nourishment. All right, so this was chapter 8. So be on the lookout for chapter 9, which is on birds, reptiles, and mammals.